Yeah, negotiation is give and take. Oh, we're not going to give up anything. Well, then you're not interested in negotiation. So then we'll go back into the jungle again. I think there's an understanding that unstate actors have a big role to play. They can do things that state actors can't do because the state actors are limited by their roles as states. That the term interest is more important than trust, and one builds trust where you can, but it must be the two parties must assure that the other party sees an interest in keeping on talking and finally following through on what's agreed. Ripeness is something that is felt. You know, we have remarkably little literature on persuasion. It's much of negotiation is in persuasion. It's obvious what the lines of an agreement would be between Russia and Ukraine against the yin coming from one side and yang coming from the other side. Trouble is that it doesn't tell us when they're going to be yin and when they're going to be yang. My father was a scientist. He was a physicist. And he was always trying to find out how and why. How do you explain this? Getting beyond the what is into why is. I was always, I was more interested in a broader way by my mother, who was a linguist and homemaker, and interested in religion as well. And all this got me interested in international affairs. And so I kind of wandered into this business of trying to explain why things happened in international relations. And since there's so many unanswered questions, I just tried to keep on pushing at doors to find more answers and more questions and more answers. We'll continue with our notion of one book a year. Conflict will never be removed, but the purpose is to have the peaceful settlement of disputes.
Today, I have a very, very special guest, Professor William Zartman. He is one of the most distinguished, outstanding scholars in the field of international conflict resolution and negotiations. He is the author of many, many books and articles, but you could find more information about him in the description. Welcome. So good to see you, Professor Zartman. It's a great honor for me.
It's a pleasure to be together.
Thank you so much. Last time I've seen you a couple of years ago in Hamburg, and always conversation with you is something very special and inspirational. You have been involved in the study of international conflict resolution, negotiation for a long time.
Right.
So let me start from asking you, has the nature of international conflicts changed in the recent years? And has anything changed in the understanding of international conflicts and perception of international conflicts? What do you think?
Well, I think things have changed enormously. We had, I don't know how far back you want to go, but we had a system of rules and regulated hostilities and competition and so on during the Cold War, where certain, as I say, norms of negotiation nonetheless prevailed. And when they didn't prevail, we knew that we were fighting up against the norms. This ended then in 89, 90 when the Cold War ended. And the norms, it's kind of like, I don't know what, a sinking lifeboat, but in which the life preservers keep on floating as the boat goes down. But those life preservers then became those norms became the dominant criterion, stronger than ever. And for a period of 10 years or something like that. Really, in 99, when Putin came in, that the whole system has been thrown away. And we're no longer operating under norms. In fact, the CRINCs, China, Russia, North Korea, Iran, and North Korea declare that the system is out and that they're no longer constrained by it. And so everybody's doing his own rules. And we're now in a double type of conflict management situation in which we are trying to manage particular conflicts, and we're also trying to reinstate the rules under which we manage conflicts. There's been another change as well, particularly in the field of the study of conflict management. Up until the end of the Cold War, we were particularly interested in great power negotiations and the possibility of great power negotiations, a very restricted field. And at the same time, we were interested in lesser actor negotiations, but under the shadow of the great power negotiations. When the great power negotiations, the conflict, the Cold War type of situation disappeared, scholarship that was interested in lesser power negotiations became the dominant trend of scholarship. And so we were quite unprepared for then this reversion into the current situation. We were interested above all in looking at small state hybrid wars, asymmetrical, I guess we called them, wars, state and the non-state actor. And now we're back in the situation where asymmetrical wars become all muddled because the weaker power, the weaker state, the non-state actors have immediately become a proxy for, or at least a hunting ground for other larger state actors, not just the CRINCs, but the kind of middle state powers. So that, and it's interesting that particularly these middle state powers are long ago powers that remember that they were once something in the world, and are after their previous kind of role or situation. People like Turkey and Iran, and well, Ethiopia as well, and I could go on and name others. So the type of actor has changed so much, and therefore the change, the study of conflict management and conflict has changed tremendously.
So on the one hand, we see now more unpredictable, uncontrolled conflicts.
Yeah.
Less rules. And also we could see new actors, middle powers, small countries are also playing a major role and get more attention from scholars now.
Right.
Okay. So how about diplomacy? Anything changed in diplomacy, let's say for the last 20 years or so? Do we see the same or new type of diplomacies?
No, in its basic nature, diplomacy continues and tries to find a hold, a purchase in any type of situation. Depending how far back you want to go, you go back to the Congress of Vienna, and diplomacy there was very different. It was, after all, there weren't states; there were just heads of states, and diplomacy was very much more it's not the diplomacy was personalized, but rather that the nature of the actor was
Mm,
personalized. Um, but all that I think is still with us. The lessons that we have from all that, and I still think we learn enormously by going back to read De Calier of
mm,
1716,
mm,
or study what went on in the Congress of Vienna, or things of that kind. So we learn out of history, even though it comes from a different period, and diplomacy works on anything that it works on. And
mm.
so a diplomat will look at any kind of situation and see what kind of, how he can get some kind of access into it.
Mm,
It is striking that in the age of certainly interstate diplomacy in the Cold War period, particularly a phenomenon known as a walk in the woods
mm.
was crucial sometimes, and there were no states involved per se. It's just two personalities getting out there and seeing how they could find some kind of common ground, and they carry on from that.
Very interesting. Prince Talleyrand, he is widely considered as a prince of negotiation.
Right.
I know that you are writing now or already finished article about or chapter of book about Talleyrand and his negotiation style.
Yeah.
Do you think his style of negotiation, his type of negotiation is still relevant? So current diplomats, modern diplomats may learn something from him or from this type of diplomats in the past.
Well, it depends on what level you attack him. Talleyrand as a person was as unappealing as he was physically, and it really beats me how many women found him worth going to bed with. His face was twisted. He was club-footed. He was a very personally unattractive person. He was a genius. He was
Mm,
as a diplomat. He was a clever person. Sometimes he was just unbearable in his behavior because he thought he had a strong position. I mean, when the Americans came over and tried and negotiated for the return or for the cession of Louisiana from France to the United States, he was nasty. He was an awful person. And the
mm,
Americans who came back really had nothing nice to say about him, except that they, for a good, cheap price, he sold us, and Napoleon sold us a big hunk of the Western Hemisphere. Um, but I think that what is so admirable and credible about Talleyrand and what he can teach us is this business of, uh, well, in two forms. The business of the balance of power as a strategy. Balance of power is something, a term that's been greatly misused. Most of the time, we really mean the distribution of power. Some are
mm,
big, some are little. But balance of power was a system in which a certain equilibrium was set. And when somebody got too big, then the smaller ones gathered together against him and so on. So that Talleyrand, I wish I had at the top of my head some of his good quotes. Talleyrand was not for winning; he was for keeping this equilibrium
mm,
balance of power.
mm,
The most patriotic Frenchmen think he's a scurrilous scum because he turned against their favorite history leader of all history, Napoleon. But the fact is that Talleyrand was higher than Napoleon in his values. He was for France in a system of equilibrium among other leading powers to be sure, but France was there among them. And of course, Napoleon had no reason to follow that kind of thing after he had walked off the plank of his own success and was ready to fall into the sea. But Napoleon was wrong. He was understandable from his point of view, personal, but Talleyrand upheld the basic values of a successful international system. I think Talleyrand is one of the top diplomats that we have in the world system because he thought of the system rather than of any individual state.
If the nature of diplomacy has not changed so much, and if we still be able to learn negotiation skill from people like Talleyrand, can we see something new in diplomatic negotiation now? How modern diplomats could adapt to all these technological changes, all these world changes in terms of actors, character of international conflicts? Anything new you could see in current diplomatic negotiations?
In a sense, in the broadest sense, no.
Mm,
We could always go back and look at something that the way some kind of action was practiced in an earlier period. Now, that said, we have to take into account the context. What was the earlier period?
mhm,
And, but I think diplomatic practice and negotiation is so broad and multiple in its actions that one can go back and pick something from an earlier time. Uh, at, on the other hand, I think that new means different from what's now,
mhm,
and so when I mentioned Walk in the Woods, uh, when the CDE negotiations were stuck, I'm sure somebody said, "Why don't we try something new?" Uh,
mhm,
and my point is that that was new compared to the deadlock in which the East and West found themselves. But that wasn't new. That there were people who did walks in the woods at earlier times, and it was merely picking back from a previous period. So I think the practice as it's been carried out throughout history will always be able to provide some ideas that are different from the current context and may be helpful.
mhm. Okay. So you mentioned the appearance of new actors. How do you see smaller actors, medium powers and small powers, could negotiate or deal with larger powers, great powers? What kinds of means do they have?
Well, smaller powers, weaker states, weaker actors have a limited role, scope of action by definition. Uh, they can't say that if you don't listen to me, I'll use my atomic weapons. Um, but they have other kinds of actions that they can take, and so on one hand, compared to big powers, um, smaller powers are weaker. On the other hand, compared to interaction with big powers, smaller powers still have activities that they can carry out. Uh, it used to be said, I guess, in the phrase comes from American Canadian negotiations back in the beginning when we started negotiating in the 80s, I believe, that the Canadians said, well, the Americans, the bigger powers work for the general principles, and then we get things back in the details.
Mm.
And sure, that's quite true. Actually, in the American-Canadian negotiations, the Americans got their general principles and then lost interest in the negotiations to the point where Canada actually exploded and said, "Look, we're serious in this business. Pay attention." And then they got something, and they got ended up by viewed at least at that time as about balanced agreement. Uh,
Mm.
we had I wrote a book, edited a book on power and negotiations, in which we talked about things that smaller powers can do, smaller states can do,
Mhm.
and there are things that are worth looking at, and there are even things sometimes that larger states can't do. And smaller states can play on their is quote inferiority in strength. Um,
Mm.
uh, Now that's true in spades when we look at asymmetrical negotiations.
Mhm.
There are things that smaller countries, that is, non-state actors, can do that no self-respecting state would do, even a
Mm.
small state would do. The problem is that one has to get them off that understanding of their role. You know, one of the biggest problems in dealing with non-state actors is that they don't know how to negotiate. Um, they come into, we're going to talk with a state actor. What do you mean? You expect us to give up something? Yeah, negotiation is give and take. Oh, we're not going to give up anything. Well, then you're not interested in negotiation. So then we'll go back into the jungle again.
Mm.
We like it, like Robin Hood. So it's very true. I mean, in the earlier Darfur negotiations, the bigger states, Nigeria and England, I believe, as well, had to send out teams to tell the rebels how to negotiate.
Mm.
Very strange, and it didn't work very well. And now we have what is it, again a situation of genocide in Sudan. Um,
Mm.
and if you don't know how to negotiate, you end up in non-negotiable types of situations, such as a genocide.
Right. So, do you expect that non-state actors, NGOs, private companies, and others would play even bigger role in the future in diplomacy, in international conflict resolution? How do you see their role?
Again, it depends what you compare it with. You compare it back to, let's say, the Cold War period, the early Cold War period. There was the non-state actors were viewed with disdain by state actors who said, "What are they doing here? This is our kind of business." We've come way, way beyond that, and I think there's an understanding that unstate actors have a big role to play. They can do things that state actors can't do because
Mm.
the state actors are limited by their roles as states, and they can't do certain things that that a state actor can do because states sign agreements. Finally, in the end, you need to have an official agreement to end the conflict in most cases of that kind. So there's plenty of role for non-state actors. I think the biggest thing that we've learned and that still remains important is to coordinate. That
Mm.
they have to respect each other's roles. and stay within the possibility of each other's roles, and see how state and non-state actors can contribute to each other's activities. Uh,
Mhm.
uh, will we get to a point where non-state actors take over the diplomatic business? No. Uh,
Mhm.
uh, but there's room
Not in
for,
foreseeable future.
right,
All right.
room for everybody.
Yeah. So trust. Trust is such an important factor in conflict, in diplomacy, in negotiation. Uh, what do you think? What mediators, negotiators, diplomats should do when there is no trust between the parties, mistrust? How they could build up trust?
But, in this debate, it's a big debate. There are two schools. There's those who say you can't negotiate if there's not trust.
Mhm.
And the other school that says obviously there's not trust when people begin to negotiate. You have to build trust uh,
Mhm.
before you get there, get to an agreement. And even that is not true. You can have an agreement between non-trusting parties. They will, they can come to an agreement with their fingers crossed, and hope that that lasts, and hope that the parties see an interest in what they've done, and the promise that it brings to them from what they've accomplished. I think in many things that the term interest is more important than trust, and one builds trust where you can, but it must be the two parties must assure that the other party sees an interest in keeping on talking and finally following through on what's agreed. Uh,
Mm.
Trust
Okay.
is important. It's not a prerequisite.
So it's important to start talking to each other even there is no trust. We could build up trust.
Right.
It's part of negotiation practice. It's
Yes, indeed.
a business of diplomats. Okay,
Yeah.
not just to wait when trust would suddenly appear, but it's important to build up it.
Right. And that's one of the goals of the one of the active goals or strains of the process itself, trying to build trust. If you
Yeah.
come to an agreement at the end that's based on trust, um, takes us back, I think, to interest again, because I have a trust that you will carry out what you're doing because we have been able to show that it's in your interest to do
Mm.
so, not just because we like trust like tulips in the morning. But so that notion of interest and trust are bound together is important as in negotiation.
Right. You are the author of well-known theory of ripeness
Yeah.
uh, in international negotiations, in conflict resolution. So how diplomats, negotiators, mediators could recognize is there any ripeness in this conflict? Could you please mention some factors which would allow us to see some elements or existence of ripeness?
Well, the interesting thing, or an interesting thing about that idea of ripeness is something that is felt.
Hmm.
The parties must feel that they are in a hurting stalemate. And I'm the only one that can tell you whether I think it hurts.
I
So
see.
there are plenty of indicators of that we would think would be indicators of hurt. But if the parties don't feel them, neither Ukraine, bless their souls, nor Russia feel that they're hurting
Hmm.
at the present time. Ukraine is beginning to, maybe. Russia is not going to feel, Putin's not going to feel that he's hurt until he's in his grave. Um, So that's a matter of personal feeling, and because it's that, it's a matter of perception of the other side, um, that they finally feel they're hurting, and there are a number of instances where parties come back and say, you know, I think they're really feeling hurting now. I think
Mm,
they're really ready now for an agreement. Um, to the point, the kind of extreme of that. Um, I think they're feeling now, but if it's not now, it's never. Uh,
mm,
so it's a perceptions of perceptions. The other
very
party must feel that the original party is feeling that kind of hurt. And oh, I don't know. I have to dig back in my literature, but at Dayton, in the dealing with Yugoslavia with the Serbs and the Bosnians, they came back to Dayton, and there's a good quote that says, I think they're ready now, um, and lots of other where the party themselves actually say this, their perception of the other party's perception.
mm,
How do you then uh, encourage that perception? Um, well, it's a teasing kind of game. You have to point out, first of all, the objective indicators of perception around you. Look how many people you're losing. Doesn't that hurt you? Look, it's not only the people, but look at the economic strain you're under. Doesn't that hurt you? Uh,
mm,
and just remind the other side, um, and often indirectly, such as op-eds and things like that, so that they look around. De Klerk, in 1990, in the fall, I guess it was, of 89 and the beginning of 90, suddenly apparently woke up one day, and I have testimony from people of friends of de Klerk, and said, you know, I realize that we can't beat the numbers. Uh, our economic situation is hurting us. We're putting everything we can into it, and it's failing. So maybe we better look for a different way, a key moment.
mm,
And then he changed his tactics. Just as a little footnote, it's important to recognize, and I think the de Klerk incident is crucial here, that de Klerk never changed his goals. His
mm,
goals were to maintain the socio-economic dominant position of the whites in South Africa, and he was willing to give up the political dominance in order to maintain the socioeconomic dominance.
mm,
So the that gives you a certain angle to operate within. This I don't know whether the ANC people said this, but you can say, Mr. de Klerk, you know, you're in a strong position socially and economically, and you would be in a stronger position in that if we were able to share the power and you can we can agree with the position that you're in, so that you can hold your position with our agreement. And that's well, you're right. I'm not changing my goals. I'm
mm,
just changing the way to get to them. And so that kind of thing can be. It's all to run to another word I've used for perceptions. but another one is persuasion. Uh,
Mm,
we have remarkably little literature on persuasion.
mm,
And it's in part because it's very hard to nail down what is persuasion. You can say, well, persuasion is couching your goals in the other party's terms. Oh, that's very deep. That's very true. But between that general observation and the details of a situation is this enormous gap. When, how, why, and so on.
mm,
But it's much of negotiation is in persuasion, uh,
right,
which is a very personal kind of skill, and yet one that a very influentiable type of skill.
right, right. So can we say that ripeness is related not just to there are perhaps some objective factors of ripeness, but it is mostly related to subjective factors, perception,
Yeah,
feeling, and
yeah,
how do we see the other side's perception? Is
yeah.
it correct?
Now, I don't want to be walked off the plank in the other direction and say it's all non-objective kinds of elements. But it's always good if you try to convince somebody that there's no door out there by their fact that there not being a door out there. So you can try to walk out here, but you got to run into a wall. There is an objective element. But as
Mhm.
long as I say, nonsense, I can go out that wall anytime, you can go home and say you're crazy, but it is the perception of the subjective appreciation of the objective situation.
Okay. So how ripeness is related to the conflict escalation?
Right. Again, escalation is a good way of bringing about a perception of ripeness.
Mhm.
You raise, I'll raise. You
Mm.
raise, I'll raise. You're sure you want to raise now? Well, gee, maybe not. So,
Okay.
escalation. But of course, there is no assurance, and again, it's a perception. The other guy may say, "Yeah, I'll do it," and I bet you won't answer. And there we go, walking up that stairs bit by bit. Um,
Mm.
we did a book on that with Olivier Faure on escalation and negotiation
Right.
because everybody was saying, "Oh, don't escalate," and our point was that escalation can lead to the perception that you shouldn't go any further. If you're walking up the steps to the attic and the door is down on the attic floor, you're suddenly banging your head against the place that you can't go any further.
Unfortunately, there are some very terrible conflicts are going on around. Conflicts in Middle East between Russia and Ukraine. So, how would you approach these conflicts from the ripeness theory? Do
Yeah.
you see any ripeness in these conflicts or not
Yeah.
yet?
Take the Middle East. Ripeness is a very, very complicated situation because on one side, there are two parties. On
Right.
the other side, there is essentially one party, and I'll put labels on them. On one side, there's the government and then the public opinion. And Netanyahu is under tremendous pressure to get the hostages back and to not to escalate any further.
Mhm.
And of course, when I say Netanyahu, I mean his coalition. He's walking a fine line and is in danger. He's very clever, and in danger of losing that coalition by listening to the other part of his side, public opinion. On Hamas's side, I think that there's no, it's just Hamas negotiating with it's within itself. There may have been at times people who probably, it's almost certain that there have been at times people who are softer than others. They say that Sinar was a softer of the two leaders of Hamas. And some people have said the Israelis were wrong in bumping him off first, and the Israelis felt that he was not soft enough to carry the day on that side. It's finding out where ripeness is in that situation is a very delicate kind of analysis of what the options are, how people feel about what they can do. Um, Another one. I think you play in the Middle East as much as you can on both sides, and you finally see. It will be fascinating to see what are the final pressures on the parties to come to a ceasefire agreement, and then how long they're going to stay there, and that kind of thing. Um, in the case of the Ukraine, I think that I think Putin is stupidly inflexible, and Zelensky is intelligently inflexible. But because I say that because I think Zelensky is weighing his interests, his prospects, and Putin is just head down in the sand and keeping on going. Very hard to find out what kind of a sense of ripeness there would be. And then this is another, I've written some stuff recently on this. Um, it's obvious what the lines of an agreement would be between Russia and Ukraine. Um, you give up a piece of Ukraine to Russia, and Russia stops bombing the Ukrainians. Well, I mean, what kind of unfair exchange is that? After Russia has bombed the hell out of the Ukrainians and they say, thanks, we're going to stop it. We've got enough for the moment, and we'll come to an agreement. And the Ukrainians look at the map and say, what? We're giving up bombing the Russians, and along that, we're giving up the 20%, I think people are saying, of Ukraine. What's in it for us? Well, what's in it for you is not getting bombed any further. But then again, what's the subjective versus the objective appreciation of ripeness?
Okay.
Situations, I think it's possible to come to uh, some kind of an agreement based on the interests of the party and the sense that it's not worth going on any further. And now in Nagorno-Karabakh, for example, a number of people felt that it would have been fair to give the Armenian section of Azerbaijan a connection to Armenia and make some deal with what is it, Nakhchivan on the other side. There would have been some trade-offs that would have been possible and fair and so on. So this is a situation that could have been worked out. But one side, again, I mean, the Putin model in the sense, the Azerbaijanis found a reliable ally and made them strong to not make any concessions, and the Armenians lost a reliable ally and had to give in as the Russian backed and Russian trained Azerbaijanis took over Nagorno-Karabakh. Um, there's always this balance, I think, between what's a fair solution and what's a solution among different powers.
Right. You just finished editing a book about China and negotiation.
Oh yes.
Could you say a few words about that, this book?
This is an extraordinary book. It's a book in which it's an edited book. Olivier is really the guiding light. He's a China specialist. I'm along simply to pick up the pieces after as we go to the printer and to try to deal with some of the procedural elements. Um, but it's a book that is contributed to by 25 different scholars, of whom half are Asian, and of whom half the Asians are Chinese. And the other people are established scholars in Chinese affairs and in negotiation. Um, and it tries to grasp what we call the mindset of the Chinese. That is, what stands behind what they're doing? What is the built-in basis of their actions and reactions in dealing with negotiations? And it's remarkable as well because as a non-China specialist, I learned an awful lot and come to lots of conclusions. But the biggest conclusion is yin yang. That is, you can go soft and you can go hard.
Right.
And sometimes both at the same time, yes. And don't be surprised at that. It's very much written into our attitudes. That's very important to be protected against the yin coming from one side and yang coming from the other side. Trouble is that it doesn't tell us when they're going to be yin and when they're going to be yang. So we have to be, it's like somebody getting up in baseball with the bat and so on. And normally he gets the ball thrown at him by the pitcher, but now there are two pitchers on either side. So and here it's going to come. No, boom, comes from the other side. Uh, and but then it goes much more deeply into that. But it develops that kind of awareness of the mindset of the Chinese negotiator.
When the book will be published?
This year, Routledge Press, it's called The Chinese Negotiating Mindset, published by Routledge in England.
Oh, wonderful. Could you please give some advice to young people who want to have a career in international conflict negotiation, diplomacy? What would be your advice to them?
Well, I would say, first of all, think about your interests that are behind your positions. That's Fisher and Uri. But think about the other side's interests and try to understand, not sympathize with, but understand where he's coming from. Um, Related to that is giving and getting. Negotiation is giving and getting. And remember that you have to give something to get something. And so the balance is between your evaluation of what you want to give in exchange for what you're getting. Remember that you have to give to get. A negotiation is a commercial exchange, and you have to decide what the price is of what you're getting and giving. I think it's important to work on at all levels of the negotiation process, as we've been talking about it, that it's personal as well as structural, subjective as well as objective in what you're after. Let me stop at that. That's three or four of the things to start with.
All right. My last question is a little more personal, if you allow me. You are so productive. Could you please share with us how did you reach such productivity? Do you have any secrets? Could you share with us with some of your approaches to the work?
My father was a scientist. He was a physicist. And he was always trying to find out how and why, how to explain this, getting beyond the what is into why is. And I was always, I was more interested in a broader way by my mother, who was a linguist and homemaker, and interested in religion as well. And all this got me interested in international affairs. And so I kind of wandered into this business of trying to explain why things happened in international relations. And since there's so many unanswered questions, I just tried to keep on pushing at doors to find more answers and more questions and more answers. And I still think there are lots of questions and answers. I was the co-founder of a group called PIN, the Processes of International Negotiation program, that started 87, some nearly 40 years ago, 38 years ago, in the International Institute of Applied Systems Analysis outside of Vienna, and then moved to Klingendahl, and then moved to some brief years in Hamburg, and now is located, is housed in the Geneva Institute for Strategic Policy, and also the Anwar Gargash Diplomatic Academy of Abu Dhabi. Um, and we have been, I glory in this creation because I think that something that's worthwhile gets itself institutionalized and keeps on developing, developing a sense of its promise and progress. It's a little funny parallel that comes to mind. It's a little like NATO. NATO was successful, and then they said, well, what are we going to do? And so they redefined themselves and found a role, and NATO is still very much around. What strikes me procedurally and substantively about the PIN group is that procedurally we became institutionalized. We had a great debate with a scurrilous Soviet member. His presence was important in the beginning in creating us, but he was a disastrous personality who finally got us kicked out of Yaza. And he said, "What are we looking for replacements for? We are 8 famous people. We can't be replaced." And I say, that's hogwash. All of us can be replaced by the next group of famous people. And even in this generation, there are other famous people are out there who would be happy to be in this group. We need to institutionalize. And we have gone on and been institutionalized so that there really only 2 or 3, Olivier Faure and Paul Mertz and myself, who are among the early members of the PIN group. And PIN, just a silly footnote, by some accident, we ended up being 1 person per country. And so we have established chairs. And so when the Swedish member left the PIN group, we said, oh, who will fill the Swedish chair? And when the German left the PIN group, we said we have to find somebody to fill the German chair. But 2 things in this case are very difficult. His first name must be Rudolph, and he must be good in game theory. That was special. No, so the point is that we have procedurally institutionalized ourselves. The other thing, and deeper than that and broader, is that is the substantive continuation of PIN. It's somewhat remarkable that I think after 37 years, 38 years, that we continue to find questions and subjects that are worth looking into. And that's not on a blank slate. That's on a slate that I've just spent lots of time describing, in which the international context of negotiation has gone through various phases and stages and differences in its nature and so on. So as the sea has rolled, we've kept our balance. There's a good image. So PIN will continue because it finds new members and because it finds new subjects.
And I've heard that Pinpoint, your magazine, is going to be a peer-reviewed journal. Is it correct?
No. No, it's mixing up two things. PIN has taken over the journal International Negotiation,
Oh,
which
okay.
we call Journal International Negotiation,
Right.
therefore JIN. JIN has become part of PIN.
Okay.
It used to be at Johns Hopkins, and now it's moved over to PIN. Pinpoints is a different story that, in a sense, I regret. Pinpoints is discontinued. There's a feeling among the members that it was no longer the kind of literature that people followed very closely. That I don't know. I'm not in favor of this, so I can't argue it very well. But that the Pinpoints had seen its day, and we will do other kinds of publication. We'll continue with our notion of one book a year
Okay.
on some subject in relation to the processes of negotiation. But in losing Pinpoints, we have taken up on our own gin, and it's become more of an international thing. The nature of gin itself, I don't think has changed very much. International negotiation, except international negotiation, is more and more accepted as the journal of its subject, international negotiation. And that in a field of good competition, like the Journal of Conflict Management or the journal, the Negotiation Journal, or things like that. So there again, our expression of our work has shifted with the times. JIN, the Journal International Negotiation, is open to contributors, not unlike Pinpoints, which was largely written by ourselves. International negotiation is open, and we are receiving more and more unsolicited, non-special issue manuscripts, and so we look forward to filling that role, and we can still hope, and there is, I guess, a very non-professional kind of thing called hope, that negotiations will become more and more important, will take over the notion of the crinks, and instead will lend themselves to the resolution of conflict. Conflict will never be removed, but the purpose is to have the peaceful settlement of disputes, an old Cold War term, and we'll be able to find conflict resolution by talking to each other. Good to talk with you.
Thank you so much. It's again great honor for me. It's so good to see you. Thank you so much.
Okay, hope we see each other in person soon.